I want to come back to the end of the sources of pain for Jacob, and I just want to just pick out essentially one more thing, and that's the consequences of the actions that are a new issue for pain. And when you look at the consequences, when bad choices are made, the results create pain and fear, even in the most mature believer. In other words, you can get your life together with God and be walking with God. Your kid can go off the deep end, do something really bad, and you're still going to live with a lot of pain. I'm at the stage of life where I watch my children choose their mate. This is always a moment of pain. And one of the reasons is even if they choose well, there's so many things you don't know and so many things that could go wrong that's a real an unstabilizing idea. Now, here's the thing. If the child of a believer jumps from a window, they fall. Everybody agree with me? Mm-hmm. But that's a child of a believer. Shouldn't they like float to heaven, or shouldn't angels catch them and gently bring them down and place them on the... Look, you break the law and you get caught, you're going to suffer. So will your family. When the child of a believer does something horrible, then the believer suffers. And you have no control over what they're doing, but you feel all the pain with them. That's the reality of it. So look at verse 30. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men, being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" No, but that's not the only way to fix it, is the answer. They're coming back and they're going, "We didn't see any alternative." Maybe you didn't ask. How about this? If you had gone to your father might have pointed you in another direction. Let me say it as nicely as I can. Just because you can't think of an alternative doesn't mean there isn't one. Let me say something else to you, and it's very important that you hear me on this. Just because you don't know the answer to a question doesn't mean the answer doesn't exist. It might mean you don't have it, but that doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't. In university classrooms across America, Christian kids are getting cornered by professors and made to feel stupid because they don't know the answer, and it makes it look in the classroom like there isn't an answer. There is an answer. He's not asking people that know it, he's asking people that don't. So he can make it look like there isn't one. There's an answer. And the fact of the matter is that people will take advantage of you. They will. They'll put you in a position where if they find that you don't know the answer to a question, they'll pounce all over it as if the Bible is wrong because you don't have the answer. What's the smart position for a believer? I may not know this, but I will find someone who does. Because I got to tell you something. We've been 2,000 years of Christianity. All the questions have been asked and answered. Don't get thrown on the ropes with who did Cain and Abel marry? Oh my, how challenging. You know? And see, the thing is, I go into a university, they do not do that to me. They do it to you. Why? Because they can get away with it. And what bothers me is that these kids came to the conclusion that they treated our sister badly. So what do? Get the pitchforks. Let's all go kill them. You know, I mean, come on. The thing is, it's time for you to take the pain of the present and fall before me. That's the resolution. God said, I can tell you how to do this. Look at it. It says, then God said to Jacob, rise, go to Bethel and live there. Make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Jacob said to his household and all who are with him, put away your foreign gods which are among you. Purify yourselves, change your garments. Let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. Would you underline, been with me wherever I have gone? That's the lesson of Jacob's life right there. The lesson is, not only that earth and heaven are connected, that the spiritual world and the physical world are connected, but that God is in it, and he's not aloof, and he's not standing on the sidelines. He's where I am. He sees what I'm about. What are the three things he told them to do? He said, I want you to get rid of all the pagan articles in your camp. I want you to set up an altar, and I want you to take your sons with you and stand in the place where I have taken you before. In other words, I want you to go back to where you met me before, and I want you to stand there with me, and I want you and your family to see that this is the place that marks our heritage. Sadly, they could have done that without killing the people of Shechem. They could have done it without killing Hamor and all of the people that were with him. Maybe God would have said, go in there and get your sister back and kill that family. Maybe God would have said, I have put in the hearts of the... What are the other options we've seen for bad mistakes of, say, Abraham and Isaac? What else could God have done for Dinah?
He could have done something like Abimelech.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. He could just change the guy's heart.
Change the guy's heart? How about show up in a dream? How about close the wombs of all the women? There's all kinds of things he could have done. He could have, made all the girls sick and mad. That would have got the whole situation changed in a heartbeat. The point is, I think God could have pulled out of the playbook of Abimelech at Gerar exactly what to do here. The problem was they didn't give him a chance. When you jump to the conclusion that you have to act without asking the Lord, you rob the Lord the chance of doing something spectacular. So when you answer the problem, you take it out of the hands of the Lord to answer the problem with a spectacular move. God could have done something way cool here, but he can't because of the way they behaved. Now, Jacob's life and story was about sin that named him. Can we all agree that Yaakov, trickster, named Jacob? And even after he surrendered to God, the deception and trickery named his children. So chapter 35, which is our last chapter before I go, is this. It seems like the word Jacob, trickster, owned his life. It seems like everywhere he went, there was another trick. His mother was a trickster. He became a trickster. His uncle was a trickster. Now his children are becoming... Do you see it? He seems to be mired in this manipulation that's going on all around him. But then God changed him and told him he didn't have to be that anymore. And the name that exposed his weakness became his history. That's something only God can do. Only God can put away the name behind you. So what's in a name anyway? Interestingly enough, in chapter 35, we're going to talk about naming 5 things. Let's see if we can mark out the verses first. In verse 1, we're going to talk about the name of Bethel. So you can put out number 1, Bethel, and that's in 35:1. 35:1. And we're going to come back and look at that one. The second one, in 35:8, is an oak tree, the naming of an oak tree. The word for oak tree in Hebrew is alon.
What was those verses again?
Verse 8. I'm just putting it next to verse 8. So the first one's next to verse 1, second one's next to verse 8. The third one is next to verse 16, the first naming of a son in a tragic story. Then go down to 18, and this is the fourth one, the renaming of that son. So there's a naming of the son in 16 and the renaming in 18. And finally, next to verse 9, 35:9, I'm going backwards, but I do it this way because it ends nicely. 35:9 is the naming of a man, and that's Jacob to Israel. And this is like a Reader's Digest thumbnail sketch of something in his life. Some stories in the Bible move the story forward. Sometimes this is an episode that's not about moving the story forward, it's about summarizing his life. And I'm going to end summarizing his life, okay? Let's go back to the naming of Bethel. Now, in verse 1 it says, God said to Jacob, arise, go to Bethel and live there and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Look at the naming of Bethel. That's marked as the destination that God calls Jacob back to, and it's a review of something that happens. You'll see down in 35:5. You'll see it in 35:15. That's the place that marks Jacob's turning point meetings with God. When Jacob meets with God in these turning point moments, it's all there. Now, God met Jacob at some of the most dramatic moments in his life. I want you to notice, where did God meet Jacob? Well, he met him in 28:10. So I would put next to 35:1, Genesis 28:10. That's the original meeting. That's the stairway to heaven. Then, where else did he meet him? 32:22. That's beside the Jabbok River. The third time is here in 35:1. And the last time he will meet him is in chapter 46. And I just want you to mark it there next to 35:1. He's going to meet him again when he left the promised land to go to Egypt. These will be the 4 times God meets with Jacob. He comes to Jacob. That's chapter 46. So 35:1 is the third one. Chapter 46 is the last one. Okay. What I want you to understand today is that God is waiting to be wanted. He waits to be desired. Your God waits for you to want him. The thing, another way, I say it often this way, you have as much of God as you choose to have. If you don't want him in some area of your life, he'll just stay out of it and let you flounder in that area. You have as much of him as you have surrendered the ground to give him. He waits to be wanted. For most believers, the problem isn't God holding out on us. The problem is us holding out on God. So, in his life, he finds in the pattern of that, God working through trying to get more of him. Now, I want you to look at something. Look at the process of hiding in the Lord in worship. I want you to look at 35:1-7 for a minute. What's involved in worship? Well, in 35:1, there's a pledge involved in worship. What is the pledge? I promise to do what? What is it?
He says he's going to build an altar.
Build an altar. Got it. I'm going to go there and I'm going to build an altar. I'm going to stop using my time for me and stop and do something that I construct completely for the Lord. When you build an altar, it's like having a worship service. What do I mean by that? You take time out of life that's about you and make it about him. So while you're putting the stones together and building up the altar, you're not only leaving a place of memorial, you're also taking the time to dedicate that time to something God once built. The second thing I know about worship is that it requires purification. And I see that in verse 2. Where is purification?
Remove the foreign gods.
Put away the foreign gods and purify yourselves. So it requires purification. That means leave what's dishonoring to God and get clean. Okay? The third thing is it also embraces praise. I see it in verse 3. I will make an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. The praise is the open testimony of God's work. I'm going to make this a place of God's work testimony. In 4 and in 5 and in 6 and in 7, worship also has a marking or a pointing place. That is, they gave Jacob all the foreign gods, all the rings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak tree that was at Shechem. By the way, what was the rings in their ears? Otherwise known as earrings. What were the earrings? Earrings are a symbol originally of 2 things. When you have a slave, you would take an awl, put it through their ear, make a hole, and then put a ring on that ear. It was a symbol of slavery or ownership. And then it became, in some Hittite tribes, it became a marking for idolatry. That was, you belonged to this god. So what they were doing was surrendering their symbols of ownership by a previous god or by someone else. You're going to see that all the way through the Bible, by the way. Earrings are a symbol of slavery. I don't know how they became like jewelry. Like, oh, that's nice. Maybe some false gods had really pretty ears. I don't know. Anyway. One of the things that Judaism had that Christianity doesn't have enough of? markers. In Judaism, on your 8th day, there's a circumcision, and that marked the beginning of the next generation's relationship with God. Every Saturday, Friday night, there's a Sabbath, and that marks a special relationship, and there's special meals that go with it. You get to be about your coming of age, say around 13, and you have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, and you become an adult. You have all these markers. In Christianity, we don't mark stuff. I mean, some of us know that we came to Jesus at a certain time when we're this many years old in the Lord, but we don't mark stuff. Jews mark stuff. There's really a benefit to that. I think it's amazing how tolerant the patriarchs were of foreign gods among them. I think, Rachel is, hiding a family household god. Well, why is there a family household god? Remember who Rachel's family is from? You remember the family of Laban? That's the family of Terah. Why is there God? They belong to the Lord God of Abraham. Why would they be household gods? I think there's an incredible number of household gods and other things, superstitions they depend upon. You got to remember that before we gained a rational science perspective on how a lot of things happen, superstition was the only game in town. So as a result, it thundered. I wonder if the gods are playing, bowling. I don't know. Everything had to have some reason, and you didn't know what the reasons were. You also lived a very small life. Imagine that you were living 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and you're living here in Sebring. You don't know what's going on in Avon Park. People didn't know what was going on over the next hill. All of a sudden, an army comes through and takes away all your sons. You didn't know they were coming. There was no news. When you wanted to know the weather, you looked out and looked up. I mean, that's how that was the weather report. By the way, it was more reliable than what you get on the... But, okay. Look, the point is that the first 7 verses really tell you about an opportunity for them to come into worship. And in verse 7 it says, he built an altar there, and they called the name of the place El Beit El. So here's the naming. Beit El is what? House of God. El Beit El is what? Could be, or the God of the house of God. God, house, God. That's what God, house of God is what it says. Why? Because they didn't just want to say this is the house of God. They wanted to say the God of the house of God revealed himself there. That's the point of the end of verse 7. Okay, so the point of the Bethel naming story is this. God meets us at specific moments in very specific places. You are not going to believe me. You are going to act as though God is just communing with you every Sunday, but most Sundays he's not. He's really not. There are moments in your life. Do you understand this? There are moments in your life where you meet God in a very unique way. Powerfully, God shows up. Lots of people are going to go to a worship service Sunday. Only a few of them are actually going to worship. Many times it's because, frankly, they're not really ready to worship. Why? Well, because they haven't made a pledge, haven't done the purification, haven't done the praise. They're still carrying Saturday night's dirty laundry into Sunday morning's worship. But sometimes it's not them. Sometimes God settles in your life and challenges you in a unique way at moments in your life. If he did it all the time, it wouldn't be special. He does it at special moments in your life. And so they marked it. They said, okay, now, so here's the thing. I will know if God met you if at the end of the service I see you going outside and bringing in rocks and piling them up on your seat, and then I will know that you had a special moment of worship. Do you understand how sad it is that we don't get to mark those? You can have these really incredible moments with God at certain times in your life. I'm not really sure why. Tell me if anybody else has had this experience. When you worship, do you ever just get teary? I'm not really sure why that happens, but it happens to me. I'm not sure if God is sad because of the way I am. I'm not sure if, because I'm a pretty pathetic Christian. I really don't know what it is. But I do know that there are moments when you just know God is there. And for some reason, a lot of those are tearful moments. They're not sad, they're tearful. At any rate, let me go past that and go to verse 8. Let's go to the naming of a tree. Okay, verse 8. Now, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak. It was named Alon Bakut. This means oak of weeping. Alon is the word for oak. Alon Bakut. And to understand the naming, you have to first grasp the scene. Deborah had either been sent by Rebekah to take care of his daughters-in-law and grandsons, or had gone of her own accord into Jacob's household after the death of her mistress. The mourning at her death and the perpetuation of her memory are proofs that she must have been a faithful and highly esteemed servant in Jacob's house. Everybody loved her. This was the marking of somebody that they loved, and so people are gathered around. And Deborah was a woman that helped to raise Jacob. And you know, the people that are part of your life like that, when you lose them, it's a deep pain. So what do? They bury her body below an oak tree, and it becomes the marker. One of the things you want to remember from that is that naming a marker over a life helped to keep her alive in their memory. One of the things we have to understand is that we really don't treasure people the way we should. For most of you, there are people in your life that are going to be here on the clock for precious few more years, but you don't really value time with them the way you should. I keep trying to tell my kids, my parents aren't going to be here that much longer. And that's going to be a moment for me. I will tell you, I'll tell every one of you right now, my father has been a solid foundation rock in my life. The day I lose my dad, the earth under my feet will shift. I will feel differently. Not only because we're one generation closer to it being me, but because this guy's always been there. My whole life he's been there, and I could turn to him. And when you lose that guy, you lose something. You got grandparents still alive? Write them a note. Make a phone call. Invest a little bit. You are who you are, in part because of they are who they are. Don't write off people that aren't involved in your life. I know, right now you're involved in what you're doing here. You got people in your life, you got friends, you got, your Facebook friends, and you got your live friends, you got, and here's the thing, it's easy to push to the margins people that are on the short list of people that won't be here that long. Would you be wise and figure out that your friends, in all likelihood, are going to be on the planet as long as you? But your grandparents, in all likelihood, are not going to live to be 212. So you're probably going to want to make a priority out of spending some time with them. Let them know that you care, because respect and care was built into the core code of the law, honor your father and your mother. But it was also supposed to be something that we embrace with our life and understand. Let me go on to the third one. So we've got a naming of El Bethel. Then we've got a naming of an oak tree in 8. If you go to 16 to 20, there's a tragic story of a mother dying at a birth. And I want you to see this one. They journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go to Ephrat. Ephrata means fruitful place. It's the district around Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem. So they're heading for Bethlehem. Rachel began to give birth. She suffered a severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing, because she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni. Ben-Oni Ben is son. On is sorrow. Oni is my sorrow, son of my sorrow. Ben-Oni. By the way, that's the last recorded word of Rachel in the Bible, is son of my sorrow. He was the son of her pain. He was the son of her exhaustion. My point isn't not that it was her fault. It was that she died having labored with all her strength, and she saw her body as unable to complete the journey she was on. Marking our dreams with names is also a practice God established. Unfortunately, Rachel was overcome with the grief of a mom that wouldn't live to see her son grow up. But what's interesting is I wonder how many will hear this for who a significant portion of their lives were named or something they could not control. I wonder how many people are going to grab onto the idea that a lot of their life, they are walking through a time when what names them was not something they controlled. I want you to know something. The renaming of the son is also an important part of the story. Would you go down to verse 18? Second half of verse 18. His father would refuse to call him son of my sorrow. What did he call him? Benjamin. Ben-Yamin. Ben, son of. Yamin, right hand. Son of my right hand. Yamin, or Yamina, to turn right. Okay. His father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. By the way, Rachel's tomb is still a place people go as pilgrims. There's a place of pilgrimage. It's also unbelievably embattled, so it has these huge concrete barriers around it now because there was so many shooting things, because there's an Arab camp right next to it. But the point is that look at the marker of sorrow that was placed on some of the lives that had to be rewritten. Jacob knew, because it already happened to him, he was not going to allow a child to take a name that was a reflection of from his birth. I want you to note that. Jacob grew up having been named by something that happened at his birth, and he was not going to let his son be named that way. I think that's a great moment. Step back and think about what Jacob just did. He said, you are not going to name this child after the death of their mother. I know what it means to be named after something that happened at my birth. So I had my hand around my brother's foot, like I could really tell. You're not going to stick a name on my child. I want you to stick this name on, son of my right hand. Let me ask you this. Don't you think that some kids in the youth group you're going to minister to are going to be walking around under the stain of a name? And it's a name that they need removed. And maybe you're the person to help them go from being Ben-Oni to being Benjamin. Now what's interesting is all of that was predicated on the knowledge you already have of the naming of a man. Look at verse 35:9 to 15. Then God appeared to Jacob again. He came to Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said, your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and the kings shall come forth from you. The land which I give you to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you. I will give the land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken to him. Jacob set up a pillar in that place where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. So Jacob named the place where God had spoken to him Beit El. Here's what I want you to see. What I want you to see is that the most dramatic encounter of God was the renaming of Jacob. Now, as we close his story, all I want you to get out of this whole idea is what's in a name. You can carry a name that is something from your past, but I want you to understand, you don't have to carry a name from something that happened to you in your past. And if you're smart, you'll turn around and let God rename your life. For some young people, what they need to do is have God rename them. I need to tell you one little piece of detail, though, before we're finished. And that is, go down to 35:21. Go to toward the end of the chapter. 35:21. Even if your name is changed, I should warn you that doesn't mean your end will be perfect. That doesn't mean everything will go well. It does mean that you'll take a good step, but it doesn't mean everything will work out. Let me show you. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. Verse 22, 35:22. It came about while Israel was dwelling in the land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Okay, this is like a low moment in Israel's life. Jacob's concubine is now sleeping with the oldest son. How many of you think this is going to be a bad moment in Jacob's life? By the way, it's a bad moment in Bilhah's life, and it's a bad moment in Reuben's life. It's going to change everything about Reuben. That's going to change whether Reuben... By the way, the firstborn rights are going to be passed out of Reuben's hands because of that action. So In essence, he showed himself to be unable to control himself and to lead well. Now there were 12 sons of Jacob, sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. I think it's interesting that at the end of Jacob's story, Esau and Jacob are actually together taking care of the burial of their father. I think that they started divided. I think that, that the story ends with Jacob being changed to Israel and Esau responding to the change in his brother, and both of them being willing together to bury the father.